Well, I think this is pretty interesting. A guy I like to follow on Twitter by the name of Michael, he sniffed this out. And I'm going to give him credit where credit is due, and I do find it extremely interesting. And we are talking about players that may have signed with Project B basketball.
3 Indiana Fever players just got the boot after what can only be described as an absolute meltdown between players and coaching staff. The franchise that was supposed to be building something special around their young core just imploded in spectacular fashion. Christie Sides found herself at the center of a coaching controversy that nobody saw coming, and the fallout has been nothing short of brutal. The drama started brewing during what should have been routine team meetings.
I went over here and they're only following 11 entities. They're only following 11 on their official Twitter feed. Kelsey Mitchell. I'm not following Kelsey, really? My girl Camila Cardoso. You can see I'm following her. The Chicago Sky, right? Jewel B. Lloyd. Yeah, Jewel Lloyd.
Instead of focusing on game plans and strategy sessions, these meetings turned into heated confrontations that had players questioning everything about the organization's direction. The coaching staff's approach to player development became a massive point of contention, with veteran players feeling completely disrespected by the way they were being handled. But here's where things get really messy. The 3 players who got released weren't just random bench warmers.
In case you guys didn't know this, my 3rd favorite player in the entire WNBA is Jonquel Jones. And they are also following Jonquel Jones. Very interesting because they're following Nike Ogumake, who is signed with their league, and Alyssa Thomas, who is signed with their league. We've heard they've already signed other players. We don't know who those other players are. Should be noted, unless I'm going crazy, Camila Cardoso.
These were contributors who had legitimate roles on the team and expected to be part of the franchise's long-term plans. The fact that management chose to side with the coaching staff over these players sends a clear message about where their priorities lie, and it's not with keeping everyone happy. The breaking point came during a particularly intense practice session where voices were raised and professional boundaries were completely crossed. What started as a disagreement about playing time and rotations escalated into a full-blown argument about respect, communication, and the overall culture that was being established within the organization. The players felt their concerns weren't being heard, while the coaching staff felt their authority was being undermined. Team chemistry, which had already been questionable throughout the season, completely disintegrated after these confrontations. Other players on the roster started picking sides, creating factions within the locker room that made it impossible to maintain any sense of unity. The situation became so toxic that something had to give, and unfortunately for these 3 players, they ended up being the ones sacrificed to preserve what management saw as the greater good.
These particular players, not counting Alyssa Thomas, but some of these players, Jonquel Jones, Kelsey Mitchell, Camila, I've not seen any kind of activism surrounding those players or anything of that sort.
What makes this even more ridiculous is that the Fever were supposed to be building a winning culture around their promising young talent. Instead, they created an environment so hostile that experienced players couldn't function within it. The irony is that these same players who got released were brought in specifically to provide veteran leadership and help guide the younger players through the challenges of professional basketball.
So, as you can imagine, we're going to keep our eyes open. But Kelsey Mitchell, Jonquel Jones are 2 huge names. Jewel Lloyd, big name. Camila Cardoso, big name, high-profile athlete out of South Carolina.
The front office's decision to back the coaching staff over the players reveals everything you need to know about their philosophy moving forward. They're clearly committed to a specific vision, regardless of how many casualties it creates along the way. This isn't just about basketball anymore, it's about power, control, and who gets to dictate the terms of engagement within the organization. Now here's where the situation gets absolutely insane. The power struggle that led to these firings didn't happen overnight. This was months of tension building up between players who expected professional treatment and a coaching staff that seemed determined to establish dominance through intimidation rather than mutual respect. The 3 players who got axed weren't troublemakers or divas demanding special treatment. They were simply asking for basic communication and transparency about their roles. Christie Sides' coaching approach became the central issue in these confrontations. Her style of leadership clashed completely with what these veteran players were used to experiencing in professional basketball. Instead of collaborative discussions about strategy and player development, meetings turned into one-sided lectures where player input was dismissed or completely ignored. The atmosphere became so tense that players started dreading what should have been routine team interactions. But wait, it gets even worse. The coaching staff began implementing policies that felt more like punishment than professional development. Practice schedules were changed without notice, playing time decisions were made without explanation, and when players asked for clarification, they were told to just trust the process. This created an environment where experienced players felt like they were being treated as disposable assets rather than valued contributors to the team's success. The breaking point came when one of the released players directly challenged the coaching staff's decision-making during a team meeting. What should have been a professional discussion about basketball strategy turned into a heated exchange about respect, communication, and whether players had any voice in their own development. The coaching staff interpreted this as insubordination, while the players saw it as standing up for basic professional standards. Not only that, but the front office's response to these conflicts revealed their true priorities. Instead of mediating between the coaching staff and players to find common ground, management immediately sided with the coaches and began planning to remove the players they saw as problematic. This decision sent a clear message to the entire roster about what happens when you question authority, regardless of how legitimate your concerns might be. The 3 players who got released tried multiple times to resolve these issues through proper channels. They requested meetings with management, attempted to have honest conversations with the coaching staff, and even reached out to player representatives to help facilitate better communication. Every attempt was either ignored or treated as further evidence of their inability to buy into the team's vision. Here's the really messed up part. These players actually wanted to succeed with the Fever. They weren't trying to create drama or undermine the organization, they were simply trying to establish a working relationship that allowed them to contribute effectively. The fact that their efforts to communicate professionally were interpreted as threats to team chemistry shows just how dysfunctional the entire situation had become. The ripple effects of these confrontations extended far beyond the 3 players who ultimately got released. Other members of the roster started walking on eggshells, afraid that asking questions or expressing concerns would put their own positions in jeopardy. Let's take a moment to rewind and examine exactly how Christie Sides' coaching philosophy became such a disaster for player relationships. The coaching staff implemented what they called accountability-first approach, which sounds great in theory but turned into a nightmare in practice. This wasn't about holding players responsible for their performance, it was about creating a culture where questioning anything was seen as betrayal of team values. The coaching philosophy centered around complete submission to authority without room for veteran input or collaborative decision-making. Players who had spent years in the league and understood the nuances of professional basketball were suddenly being treated like college freshmen who needed to prove their worth through blind obedience. This approach completely ignored the reality that experienced players bring valuable perspectives that can actually improve team performance. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. The 3 released players weren't just random veterans causing problems, they were specifically chosen by the front office during the offseason to provide leadership and stability for the younger players on the roster. The irony is that these same players who were brought in to mentor and guide the team's development were kicked out for trying to do exactly what they were hired to accomplish. The coaching staff's game plan seemed to involve breaking down veteran players mentally before building them back up according to their specific vision. This psychological approach might work with college athletes who are still developing their professional identity, but it's completely inappropriate for established players who have already proven themselves at the highest level. The veterans saw through this manipulation immediately and refused to participate in what they considered unprofessional behavior. What makes this even more ridiculous is that the coaching philosophy actually worked against the team's stated goals. The Fever claimed they wanted to build a competitive franchise around their young core, but their approach alienated the exact players who could have accelerated that development process. Instead of leveraging veteran experience to create a winning culture, they chose confrontation over collaboration and lost valuable resources in the process. The impossibility of the working environment became clear when players realized that success on the court wasn't enough to maintain their positions. Even when the 3 released players performed well during games and practice sessions, their willingness to ask questions or suggest improvements was held against them. This created a situation where players had to choose between being effective contributors or being seen as team players by the coaching staff. Not only that, but the coaching staff's communication style made it impossible for players to understand expectations or receive constructive feedback. Instead of clear directions about roles and responsibilities, players received vague instructions followed by criticism when results didn't match unstated expectations. This type of communication breakdown is exactly what destroys team chemistry and creates the hostile environment that ultimately led to these firings. The final straw came when the coaching staff began making decisions that directly contradicted what they had told players about their roles and development plans. Promises about playing time, positioning, and long-term opportunities were broken without explanation or discussion. Now here's where things get completely out of control. The ripple effects from these firings have absolutely destroyed what little team chemistry the Indiana Fever had managed to build throughout the season. The remaining players are now walking around the facility wondering if they're next on the chopping block, which is exactly the opposite of what you want when you're trying to develop young talent and establish a competitive franchise. The locker room atmosphere has become absolutely toxic since these three players got the boot. Players who used to have casual conversations about basketball strategy are now afraid to express any opinions that might be interpreted as criticism of the coaching staff. This fear-based environment is killing the natural communication that's essential for team development and on-court chemistry. But wait, there's more chaos coming. The younger players on the roster are completely confused about what's expected of them now that the veterans who were supposed to guide their development are gone. These rookies and second-year players were relying on experienced teammates to help them navigate the challenges of professional basketball, and suddenly that support system has been completely removed from the equation. The front office's decision to prioritize coaching staff loyalty over player retention sends a terrifying message to every other player in the organization. The clear signal is that questioning authority or advocating for professional standards will result in immediate termination, regardless of your talent level or contribution to team success. This type of authoritarian approach creates an environment where players stop caring about improvement and focus solely on survival. Here's what nobody's talking about but should be absolutely obvious to everyone. The Fever just lost valuable assets for absolutely nothing in return. These weren't players who were demanding trades or causing public relations nightmares. They were contributors who could have been valuable pieces in potential trades or at minimum provided depth during the long season. Instead, the organization chose to release them outright, getting zero value back for their investment. The timing of these firings couldn't have been worse for the franchise's long-term development plans. The team was supposed to be building stability and continuity around their young core, but instead they've created uncertainty and drama that will follow them into next season. Free agents and potential trade targets are definitely taking notes about how the organization treats its players when conflicts arise. Not only that, but the coaching staff's credibility with the remaining players has been permanently damaged. Even players who didn't directly support the three released teammates are now questioning whether the coaching staff can be trusted to handle conflicts professionally. This breakdown in trust makes it incredibly difficult to implement any meaningful development programs or establish the accountability that's necessary for team success. The fanbase reaction has been brutal for the organization's public image. Social media is absolutely roasting the front office for their handling of this situation, and ticket sales for remaining home games have taken a noticeable hit. The Fever were already struggling to maintain fan interest, and this drama has made it even harder to convince people that the franchise is heading in the right direction. But here's the bigger picture that extends far beyond just the Indiana Fever's organizational dysfunction. This entire situation exposes massive problems with coaching culture throughout the WNBA and how player-coach relationships are managed when conflicts arise. The league has been trying to establish itself as a professional environment that respects athletes, but situations exactly this prove there's still a long way to go. The broader implications for WNBA coaching standards are absolutely staggering when you really think about it. If organizations can simply fire players for asking questions or expressing concerns about professional treatment, then the league isn't actually providing the stable career environment that top athletes deserve. This creates a culture where players are afraid to advocate for themselves, which ultimately hurts the overall quality of basketball being played. What's even more disturbing is that other WNBA teams are definitely watching how this situation plays out. If the Fever faces no consequences for their handling of these player conflicts, it sets a precedent that other organizations might follow when dealing with their own internal disputes. This could lead to a league-wide shift toward more authoritarian coaching approaches that prioritize control over collaboration. The player development implications are absolutely devastating for the entire league's future. Young players entering the WNBA are supposed to learn professionalism and leadership skills from veteran teammates who have experience navigating the challenges of professional basketball. When organizations systematically remove these mentorship opportunities, they're sabotaging their own development pipelines and creating cycles of dysfunction. Let's be completely honest about something that nobody in the WNBA wants to acknowledge. The league's financial constraints already put enormous pressure on players to accept substandard working conditions compared to other professional sports. When you add coaching staff power trips and front office incompetence to that equation, you create an environment where talented athletes might choose to pursue opportunities in overseas leagues that offer better treatment. The most concerning aspect of this entire mess is how it reflects on the WNBA's commitment to player empowerment and professional standards. The league has marketed itself as being progressive and player-friendly, but situations exactly this reveal that those values aren't being consistently implemented at the organizational level. Players are starting to realize that their voices don't actually matter when conflicts arise with coaching staff or management. Not only that, but the precedent being set here affects contract negotiations and player movement throughout the league. Free agents and players considering extensions are definitely factoring in how organizations handle internal conflicts when making their career decisions. The Fever's approach to this situation makes them a less attractive destination for quality players who want professional treatment. The long-term damage to the Indiana Fever franchise specifically cannot be overstated. They've established themselves as an organization that chooses confrontation over communication and control over collaboration. This reputation will follow them for years and make it incredibly difficult to attract the type of veteran leadership that's essential for developing young talent and building a competitive team. If you're enjoying this content and would like to see more drama breakdowns and support the channel, please hit that subscribe button.